Celeste Ainsworth offered to make me a rich man at 9:40 on a Tuesday night, with a flashlight clamped in my teeth and her diamond watch about 6 inches from my nose. I was flat on my back on the steel grating up in the base terminal, one shoulder jammed against a sheave guard, working an inspection cap loose under the crossarm of the terminal tower. The crack I was about to find wasn't even fully in the light yet. It was hiding behind a little aluminum cover that the maintenance manual never tells you to remove, because the people who wrote that manual decided, a long time ago, that nobody needed to look there. I happen to know exactly how that decision got made. I was in the room when they made it, but nobody standing under that gondola knew that. Yet, as far as they were concerned, I was West Oil, the night mechanic somebody had dragged off his couch on his day off because a sensor wouldn't stop nagging. She crouched down next to me on the grating, careful with her coat, and she said it plain, the way you'd offer somebody a coffee. "Whiz, if this line runs tonight, I will make you a wealthy man. You name the number. I'll beat it." I took the light out of my mouth. I looked at the thin gray line I'd just uncovered, running across the lug of that, casting exactly where I'd promised a room full of people it would, 10 years and 2 provinces ago. Then I looked at her. "Shut it down," I said. "Nobody rides tonight." She didn't move for a second. And by sunrise, 11 people would understand why a hairline the length of a fingernail mattered more than the whole resort. By sunrise, every one of them would also know the thing I'd kept to myself for 7 years in that valley. But the crack isn't where this story starts. The crack is just where it caught up with me. It starts with a decision I made 10 years ago, and what it cost me, and how long I went thinking it had cost me for nothing. My name's West Doyle. I'm 43. These days I'm a lift maintenance mechanic at a resort up in the Selkirks, the kind of job where you spend half your shift hanging off a tower in weather that wants to kill you, greasing line gear and listening to steel. I hold the tickets that let me sign a ropeway back into service after work's been done on it. When I sign it, it's mine. If a cabin comes down off that line with people in it, the first thing the investigators do is go find my signature. That's what I am now. It isn't what I started as, but I'll get there. Let me tell you about my kid first, because he's the reason any of the rest of it means anything. Owen's 10. He's with me full-time. His mother, Robin, and I split up about 4 years back. No big blow-up, no story worth telling. We just wore each other down to nothing and finally admitted it. She's in Calgary now with a decent guy who sells insurance, and Owen flies down to see her on holidays. The rest of the year it's the two of us in a little place I'm still paying off, in a town where the grocery store and the liquor store share a parking lot, and everybody knows whose truck is whose. The night it all happened started like 1,000 other nights. I picked Owen up from the after-school program at the rec center, and on the drive home he informed me, in that lawyer voice he gets, that his science project was a catastrophe. They had to build a tower out of bamboo skewers and hot glue, and it had to hold a stack of textbooks without folding, and his kept buckling. "It bends right in the middle, Dad, every time. I put the second book on and it just goes." "Where's it actually letting go?" I asked. "Not where it bends. Where does it start?" He thought about it. "The bottom corners, I guess, where the legs hit the base." "Then the middle's not your problem. The middle's just where you can see it. Your problem's down at those corners where all the weight ends up landing. Don't reinforce the part that's wiggling. Reinforce where the load comes down." He went quiet on that the rest of the way home, turning it over the way he does. We had grilled cheese and tomato soup because it was that kind of night, and he rebuilt his bottom corners at the kitchen table while I did the dishes. At 7, my neighbor Doreen came over. She's a retired schoolteacher, watches him whenever I get called in, and my phone went off. It was Big Pete Sauvé, my night maintenance lead, and he sounded like a man who'd already lost an argument and needed reinforcements. "Whiz, I need you up here. Tonight. It's the new D-line, the showpiece. Ainsworth herself is down here leaning on everybody. She's got money people upstairs, and Tyler signed the morning run-up, but there was a flag and I don't—" "Wes, just come look at it, please." "What's the flag?" I said. "Lateral on the terminal sheave train, Tower 1. It pinged twice during the test cycle this morning." I didn't say anything for a second. Pete had no idea what he'd just handed me. To him it was a fault code. To me, it was 10 years of my life ringing on the other end of a phone. "On my way," I said. I kissed the top of Owen's head, told him to be in bed by 9, and not to argue with Doreen about it, and I drove up the mountain with my hands tighter on the wheel than the road needed. Here's what I drove into. Celeste Ainsworth had built the whole resort, Aurora Ridge, the brochures called it, like the place had been there since the last ice age instead of being 2 years old. She'd come up from real estate, made an absolute pile of money down in Vancouver, and then she'd done what people with that kind of money do when they want to be remembered for something other than condos. She'd sunk it all into a mountain. The crown jewel of the whole thing was a brand new detachable gondola, a Brandauer D-line, top of the market, that ran from the base terminal clear up to a glass restaurant on the summit ridge with a view that genuinely stopped your heart. And tonight was the night. She had 4 investors up in the lounge, a group out of Toronto and 1 out of Calgary, the kind of people who move $10 million the way I move a wheelbarrow, and the whole deal hung on the next 2 hours. The plan was a private inaugural ride, load the investors into the lead cabins at 10, run them up to the summit in the dark, candlelit dinner, the lights of 3 valleys laid out below them like somebody had spilled a jewelry box. A live demonstration that Aurora Ridge wasn't a dream, it was a working machine. Close the financing, and the resort had a future. Miss it, scare them off, and the money walked back down the mountain to Toronto. I understood all of that inside about 90 seconds, because everybody told me at once, the second I walked through the terminal doors and hadn't even clipped my badge on yet. The mountain operations director got to me first, Drake Connolly. Tall, tanned in March, the kind of silver hair that costs money to keep looking that careless. "You the second opinion," he said, and the way he said it told me exactly what he thought a second opinion was worth. "Look, the line's fine. We caught a lateral on a Tower 1 sensor this morning during the cycle. It's inside tolerance. It's almost certainly the sensor itself. Ops wanted a structures guy to bless it before we load passengers. Fine. But we're loading at 10, so whatever you're going to do, make it quick." "Lateral on the terminal sheave train," I said. "Which axis?" He blinked. "Most of you don't ask that." "Crossline, side to side, the whole assembly rocking." "And that doesn't worry you?" "No reason yet," I said, which was a lie, and it was the first one I told that night, because there was a very specific reason it would rock side to side, and there was exactly one thing on that tower that could let it. Tyler did the morning inspection. Tyler Beaumont, 24, sharp kid, already defensive before I'd even reached the terminal tower. He'd checked the crossarm, he told me. Everything looked nominal. The lateral was probably a bad accelerometer. They'd swap it in the morning. I didn't argue with him. I never argue at that stage. Steele doesn't care who's right. I just asked him where the drop light was, and I went up onto the catwalk. I didn't go to the cover Tyler had popped. I went 2 panels inboard, to a little aluminum cap under the crossarm yoke that nobody opens on a routine because the manual doesn't send you there. I knew to open it because a long time ago I'd sat in the meetings where we decided what that manual would and wouldn't send a guy to look at. And I'd lost the argument about this exact spot. That's where I was, working the cap free. When Celeste Ainsworth came up the catwalk in heels, she had no business wearing on steel grating and offered to make me rich. For a second after I told her to shut it down, she just studied me, deciding whether I was a problem she could manage or a fool she could roll over. Then she said, very even, "I'm going to need you to explain that. Quickly. There are 4 people in a room upstairs about to commit to a number that keeps 200 people employed in a town that didn't have 200 jobs before I showed up. So you'll want to be sure." "Come up here," I said. "I'll show you." I got the last cap free and folded it down, and I handed her the drop light and put her hand on it so the beam sat right on the line. That casting is the yoke that holds the whole terminal sheave assembly onto the tower. The sheaves carry the haul rope. The yoke carries the sheaves. That mark running across the lug, there, that's a crack. "It's a scratch," Drake said behind us. He'd come up too. "It isn't. A scratch sits on top and catches your nail one way. This catches both ways. That's a crack with depth to it." I looked at her, and it's a fatigue crack, which means it's been working itself open in that spot for a long time. It didn't show up today. It's been growing for years. Tonight just happens to be the night somebody finally pointed a light at the right place. Drake made a sound through his nose. "There are damage limits in the inspection standard, allowables." "Not for a crack through the load path of a primary attach lug, there aren't," I said. "Corrosion, pitting, a ding, sure, there's a limit. A crack straight through where the force lands is a no-go, and you know it." He did know it. I watched him know it, and I watched him decide he'd rather not have known it. That's the part people who've never stood in that kind of room don't understand. It isn't that nobody else can see the thing. It's that seeing it is expensive. So a roomful of smart, experienced people quietly agree, without ever saying it out loud, not to look in the one place that would ruin the night. I knew that feeling. I'd watched a whole company do it once, with my name on the dissent. Celeste straightened up. The smooth thing in her voice had a hairline of its own in it now. Then we find another mechanic, someone willing to sign it. With respect, Wes, you've been on this catwalk for 20 minutes. And that's where the night turned. Because I was tired, and I was standing under a machine I had helped design, looking at the exact failure I had drawn on a whiteboard a decade before, and been laughed out of the room for, being told I'd been there 20 minutes. You're right, I said. I've been up here 20 minutes, but I've known about this casting for 10 years. The terminal went quiet under the hum of the standby motor. What does that mean? Celeste said. It means I want you to do something before you fire me. I came down off the catwalk and walked to the maintenance desk where the logbook sat. Call Brandauer. Not the sales office, the field engineering line, the one that's manned around the clock. Tell them you've got a suspected fatigue crack on the terminal crossarm yoke of a D-line, and read them the serial number off the data plate by the door. And while you've got them, ask them to pull the original fatigue analysis on that yoke from the certification file. Ask them whose name is on the minority report. Whose name is on it, she said. I didn't answer that. Not yet. Some things you have to earn the right to say out loud, even when they're about you, especially when they're about you. Just make the call. She looked at me a long moment, and then, this was the first thing that made me think there was more to Celeste Ainsworth than the coat and the watch. She didn't fire me. She took out her phone. It's 9:45 at night, Drake said. It's a manufacturer's safety line, I said. Somebody's always sitting on it. That's the entire reason it exists. While she dialed, I did the thing I think actually saved everybody, the thing they train into you and you hope you never have to use in earnest. I opened the maintenance log, and in my own handwriting, with the date and the time, 9:48, I wrote up a discrepancy. Suspected fatigue crack, terminal tower crossarm yoke, upper attach lug, ropeway removed from service pending non-destructive examination, return to service withheld. I signed it with my certificate number, and I walked over and snapped a red lockout tag onto the master control with my own hands. The second that entry existed and that tag was on, the line was legally dead. Celeste Ainsworth could fire every mechanic between here and the Alberta line. She could not make that gondola legal to carry one single person until somebody qualified signed it back. I'd shut it down with a pen and a piece of plastic. Tyler had come up beside me, pale as the snow outside. Did I miss that? It's behind a cap the manual doesn't send you to, I said. It's a hard catch. Don't carry it. Then I gave him the real lesson, because the kid had earned the truth and not the comfortable version of it. But that lateral flag this morning wasn't nothing. That was the machine telling you the crossarm had shifted on its mount. And there's exactly one thing that holds that crossarm true. You felt the symptom. You just didn't chase it back to the cause. Next time something flags, don't ask whether it's inside tolerance. Ask what would have to be true for this reading to be happening. That question puts your hand right on this lug. He nodded. He's going to be fine, Tyler. The ones who feel sick when they nearly miss something always are. It's the ones who shrug that keep me up at night. Across the terminal, Celeste had been talking low into the phone, then less low, and then she stopped talking entirely and just listened for a long time, with her free hand pressed flat against the desk like she needed it to hold herself up. When she finally lowered the phone, she came back across the floor, looking at me differently. Not warmly, carefully. The way you look at a thing when you've just found out it isn't what the label said. They're sending an examiner and a crew tonight, she said. From the regional office in Kamloops. The man on the line got very quiet, very fast when I read him the part and the serial. She paused, and then he asked me how I'd known to call about that specific casting. I told him my mechanic flagged it. He asked your name, I gave it to him. She stopped. 50, and he went silent for a second, and then he said, and I'm quoting him, if Wes Doyle is the one who found it, then it's real, and you should be very glad he was in the building tonight. Drake Connolly looked at me like he'd never seen me before in his life. Who are you? Celeste said. So I told her, standing under the lead tower of a gondola I'd helped design, a little before 10 at night. I finally told somebody the whole thing. I didn't start out an engineer and become a mechanic. I started a mechanic. Got my millwright ticket at 21 because I loved that a machine will tell you the truth if you know how to listen to it. Then I put myself through a mechanical engineering degree at night, working days, and I went corporate. Ended up at Brandauer, the ropeway manufacturer. On the structures team, the people responsible for the towers and the cross arms and the castings that hold the whole moving line up off the ground. And 10 years ago, I was the engineer who ran the fatigue analysis on the cross-arm yoke of a brand new model, the D-line. This machine, this family of machines, the one I was now standing under in the dark, 300 kilometers from where I'd designed it. You built this, Celeste said. I didn't build the whole thing. It takes a few hundred people to build one of these. I worked on one piece, the part that holds the line on the towers, and when I ran the fatigue numbers on that yoke during certification, I didn't like what I saw. This was the part I'd never told a living soul in that valley. Not Pete, not the guys I had a beer with after shift. They thought I was a mechanic with a chip on my shoulder and unusually good hands. Nobody knew about the conference room in Calgary. The casting, the requirement on paper, barely. The analysis said it would last the design life under the loads we expected, but I kept running the cases that weren't on the standard sheet. A hard catch on a misload, certain wind directions, a heavy rime ice buildup on a full line on a cold morning, the way those loads stacked up in that one lug, and the margin got thin, not fails, tomorrow thin. Cracks years early if the conditions line up and the inspection interval is too long to catch it thin. I wanted one of two fifth things, a small change to the casting to put margin back in the lug, or, if not that, a much shorter mandatory inspection at that exact spot, with an instruction printed in the manual telling the mechanic to pull that cap and look. Either one cost money, either one slipped the certification schedule, and there were people whose bonuses and whose promotions were tied to that schedule. I was overruled. The analysis was inside the requirement. The interval stayed long. The instruction to pull that cap never made it into the book, and I became, in the language they use for it, difficult to work with. So you quit, Celeste said. I said, I wrote a memo. I wrote it the way you write something when you already know you've lost, and you just need it to exist somewhere with a date on it. I laid out the failure mode, the load cases, the spot, the interval I thought it needed. I recommended the change. I logged my dissent in the certification file, and then I watched it get filed, and I watched the model get certified anyway, and within a year I'd been managed out of the company so smoothly I almost admired it. No firing, just a reorg, a role that quietly stopped existing, a severance, a handshake. I spent a year angry. I spent 2 more sending out resumes that went nowhere, because the industry's small and a guy who torpedoes his own employer's flagship gets a reputation faster than he gets a callback. So I did the only thing that ever made me feel sane. I went back to the floor. I took my old hands-on tickets. I moved up to a mountain town where nobody knew the corporate version of me, and I got a job maintaining the exact machines I used to design. For 7 years, I greased and inspected, and signed off on lifts, including, eventually, the day they installed a D-line at Aurora Ridge, and I said nothing at all, because what was I going to say? That I'd warned about a part on this model a decade ago, in a building that didn't exist anymore as far as anyone here knew. They'd have thought I was the kind of man who tells you he almost played in the NHL. So I just inspected it on the long interval, like the book said, and I never opened that cap, because the book never told me to, and I told myself the odds were long and the fleet was young. And then one cold Tuesday the loads finally stacked up the way I'd drawn them, on the one tower I'd lain awake over 10 years before. The Brandauer examiner and his crew rolled in a little after 11, and they ran a dye penetrant and then an eddy current probe across that lug, and the readout was not subtle. A through crack, well-developed, marching straight across the load path of the yoke exactly where I'd put it on a whiteboard in Calgary. The lead examiner, older guy, Okonkwo, the kind of calm that only comes from having seen the bad version of this more than once, pulled his glasses off and looked at me for a while. "You're the dissent," he said. "Not a question. I read your name in the file an hour ago on the drive up." He looked back at the casting. Another half season of this loading and that lets go. Crossarm comes off the tower. Line derails. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. You do the arithmetic yourself. A loaded gondola line in the dark, over rock and trees, with a torn loose crossarm dumping the rope off the sheaves. He just said quietly, there'd have been cabins on it. 11 people were going to be on it. 4 investors, Celeste, Drake, a couple of resort hosts, a photographer, the chef who'd gone up early to plate the first course. 11 souls on a ride that was supposed to leave at 10 and never did. I looked at Celeste, and she was staring at that green, eddy current trace like it was a photograph of something terrible that hadn't happened yet. And I understood she was doing the same math I was, except every name on her list was somebody she'd personally invited onto that line. I was going to ride up in the last cabin, she said, mostly to the casting. I wanted to watch their faces when the valley lit up underneath them. She didn't cry. She isn't built that way. But something went out of her face and something else came into it. And when she finally turned to me, her voice had lost every gram of the steel it had carried 2 hours earlier. I offered you money to ignore that, she said. I stood on that catwalk and offered to make you rich if you'd let it run. You did. And you told me to shut it down. I did. She nodded slowly, putting it together. And 10 years ago you tried to stop this before it was ever bolted to a tower, and the company chose a schedule over you, and it cost you your career. It did. And you came back and spent 7 years underneath the machines you used to design, and you never told a single person. The machines don't care what my old business card said, I said, and it turns out neither does a crack. 150. There's a part that comes after that night that's bigger than the night, and it's the part I'm actually proud of. Because of what I'd written in that log, and because of a 10-year-old memo that suddenly mattered very much, Brandauer couldn't write this off as one resort's bad luck. If that yoke had cracked from a known failure mode at a known weak point, and now there was a guy with a dissent on file saying it would, then every D-line that had ever taken a hard catch or a heavy ice season was suspect. Okonkwo's findings that night became the first data point in something a lot bigger than Aurora Ridge. Within a few weeks, Brandauer issued a service bulletin telling every operator to do a one-time eddy current inspection of that cross-arm yoke across the entire installed fleet, with a much shorter recurring interval after that. Roughly the interval I'd asked for 10 years before, and because a safety of life finding like that isn't a suggestion, the provincial regulator backed it with a directive, and the equivalent bodies in the other countries where those lifts run did the same, and the whole thing went mandatory, worldwide. They found cracks on 2 other installations, one at a resort in the Alps, one in the Rockies, 2 valleys over from a place I'd skied as a teenager, both early units, both with hard catch history in their logs, both inspected and put right back in service under the old long interval, both running every weekend, full of families. I think about those 2 lifts more than I think about ours, to be honest. Ours had me lying under it at 9:40 on a Tuesday by sheer dumb luck. Those 2 had nobody. The only thing standing between them and a derailment over rock was a paragraph in a directive that existed because of a fingernail-length line in a terminal in the Selkirks, and a memo an angrier, younger version of me had filed in a drawer 10 years before, dead certain nobody would ever read it. You do the right thing once, quietly, and you lose everything for it. And you spend 7 years deciding it meant nothing, and then one cold night it reaches across a decade and saves people you will never meet, on machines you will never ride. I still don't have a clean way to describe what that did to me. I just know I'd needed it for a lot longer than I'd let myself admit. Now, I told you there's no fairy tale here, and there isn't. Celeste didn't write me a check for $1 million. Real life doesn't run that way. What she did was in some ways better, and it took her a few weeks because she did it properly instead of dramatically. The financing fell apart. Of course it did. You can't tell 4 cautious people with money that the demonstration machine had a fatal crack and expect them to feel reassured about the demonstration. The lead investor, a tight, careful man named Prentice, made a remark about whether Aurora Ridge was ready for prime time and said they'd circle back in the new year, which in money language means never. The biggest night of Celeste Ainsworth's life was a write-off. A lot of people in her chair bury the mechanic who caused it, quietly fix the part, lay off the troublemaker, control the story. Celeste called Brandauer and the regulator herself, that first morning, before anybody made her. That told me who she actually was under the coat. And 50. And about 3 weeks later, I'll get the timing exactly right because it matters to me. She asked me to come into her office, and she offered me a job, not my old mechanic's slot, a new one, Director of Ropeway Safety and Integrity for the whole Aurora Ridge Group, reporting to the board and nobody else. Independent of operations, independent of the people whose job it is to sell tickets and run the line on time. I told her I'd take it on conditions, and we wrote them down on the record like adults. I told her the real problem in her operation was never a bad mechanic. Tyler wasn't a bad mechanic. The real problem was that for one night, the entire survival of the company had been allowed to rest on the one person whose whole job is to say no when no is the true answer. And then that person had been offered a fortune to say yes by the most powerful person in the building, with the operations director breathing down his neck and a clock on the wall. I told her the entire value of a mechanic's signature is that it cannot be bought, and it cannot be rushed, and the second it can be, it's worth nothing, and so is every machine it's ever been on. So here's what I asked for, and what she put in writing with the board's names under it: a safety authority that reports independently, never under the people whose job is to make the line run on time. Hard staffing and rest rules, so nobody ever again does a safety inspection at the tail end of a 16-hour day with everyone watching the clock. And a signed red tag authority: any mechanic, any inspector can shut down any lift for a safety reason and cannot be fired, disciplined, demoted, or leaned on for it, ever, even if they turn out to be wrong. Because the day you punish a person for a no that turned out to be unnecessary is the day everybody quietly learns to stop saying no, and then one day the no that actually needed saying never comes, and 11 people get in a cabin. She signed all of it. 10 years ago, she said, when the pen was down, a company decided your no was too expensive. I'd like Aurora Ridge to be the place that decided it wasn't. She slid the document across the desk so I could see my own name printed at the top of it. It should have your name on it. You paid for it twice. I didn't have anything to say to that, so I just signed. I got home late the night it all got finalized, a little over 3 weeks after the night in the terminal. Owen was at the kitchen table, and the bamboo tower was gone. How'd it do? I asked. The science fair had come and gone with everything else that month. He held up a ribbon, read second. Second, I said. What beat you? This girl made a working volcano with the foam and everything. Everybody loves a volcano. He rolled his eyes exactly the way his mother used to. But Dad, the judge said mine was the only tower in the whole gym that didn't fold when they loaded all the books on. Hers just looked cool. Mine actually held. I sat down across from him. You know why it held? Because I fixed the corners, he said. Where the weight comes down, not the part that was wiggling. Where the weight comes down, I said, not the part you can see. He grinned and went back to whatever he was building next. A trebuchet, I think. God help my kitchen. And I sat there a minute and thought about a gray line on a casting under a cap that nobody is ever told to open, the spot where all the force quietly ends up. And I thought about a younger guy in a conference room in Calgary, losing an argument and a career, filing a memo into a drawer, dead sure it would never matter to anyone. It mattered. It just took 10 years and one cold Tuesday to find out. I make a decent living now. I'll never be rich. There's a version of that night where I take the number she offered and I'm a wealthy man, and there is no version of that night where I take the number and still get to sit across a kitchen table and explain to my kid why you reinforce the corners nobody's looking at. I picked the table. I'd pick it again every single time. So let me ask you one thing before you go. I went back to work, quietly, underneath the very thing that took my career from me, and I waited 7 years without ever knowing if being right would ever count for anything. Have you ever been the one in the room who said the hard no, the one nobody wanted to hear? And did it ever come back around for you the way it did for me, or are you still waiting? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, and I'd honestly like to know. And if any of this landed with you, if you believe the person who says the difficult no is worth more than the one who says the easy yes, do me a favor and hit that like button, leave a comment so the next person finds it, and stick around, because the next one's a story I've been wanting to tell for a long time. For a long time I believed the night in that terminal was about luck, and part of it was. I happened to be the one on the catwalk. I happened to pull the cap nobody pulls. But the longer I sit with it, the more I think luck only got me to the lug. Everything after that came from things I'd been quietly building for years without knowing I was building them. The crack didn't choose me because the universe owed me one. It found me because 10 years earlier I'd done the harder thing instead of the easier one. I ran the load cases nobody asked me to run. I wrote the memo I knew would cost me, and I filed it anyway, because a thing being inconvenient has never once made it untrue. That choice didn't pay me back for a decade. It just sat in a drawer being right while I greased towers in the cold and wondered if I'd thrown my whole career away over a casting most people would never think about. Honesty doesn't come with a receipt. You pay up front and you wait, and sometimes the waiting is the entire test. But being decent wasn't enough on its own, and I want to be straight about that with you. If I'd only been honest, I'd have missed it too. What put my hand on that exact spot was years of learning to read a machine, chasing a symptom back to a cause, asking not is this inside tolerance, but what would have to be true for this to be happening, knowing where the force lands instead of where the metal happens to wiggle. That's not a gift. That's a thing you earn slowly, one mistake and one cold morning at a time, and it's the part of me I'm proudest of, because nobody handed it to me. And then there's the 7 years. The plain refusal to quit on yourself after the world has politely informed you that your no was too expensive. I went back underneath the very machines that had cost me everything, and I stayed there, unsure the whole time whether it would ever amount to anything. Celeste signing those rules into the company didn't undo that stretch. It gave it a meaning it didn't have on its own. Tyler, that kid feeling sick over a near miss, he'll be a better mechanic than me one day, and I'll have had a small hand in that. Those 2 lifts in the mountains, full of families, still running, they don't know my name and never will. I told Owen you reinforce where the weight comes down, not the part you can see. I think people are the same. The honesty is the joint. The judgment is the bracing. The refusing to fold is the thing that holds it under load. Build all 3, quietly, where nobody's looking, and one cold Tuesday, they'll hold when everything's on them. I didn't get rich. I got to keep my own signature. That turned out to be the better deal.